Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the UN Women Online Regional Dialogue Media Reporting on Gender Responsive Budgeting Conference. UN Women Office in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Media Center Sarajevo organized this regional dialogue on the role of media in improving gender responsive budgeting. Today here we have journalists, editors, and media professionals from the countries of the Western Balkans to discuss activities stemming from the UN Women Regional Project named Transformative Financing for Gender Equality towards more transparent, inclusive, and accountable governance in the Western Balkans. Through the conference, we will be focusing on the findings of the study on media reporting on gender responsive budgeting, but also on the journalists' needs for specialized training in this area and other potential needs. My name is Hanna Sokolovic, and I will be moderating today's conference. A couple of technical notes. As you have probably seen, we are filming the conference. For any questions or comments you might have during any part of the conference, please feel free to use the buttons at the lower part of your Zoom screen, the Q&A one. And during the time that we have planned for discussion, we will make sure that you get all of your answers. I would now like to invite Ermira Lubani from UN Women, the regional manager of the project, to make introductory remarks.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. In fact, today we are opening completely a new chapter on gender responsive budgeting in the Western Balkans with leadership of our office in Bosnia and Herzegovina. UN Women is very pleased to have the opportunity to initiate a discussion on gender responsive budgeting and media reporting, since media remain the main source of information about the latest, which is necessary in order to adequately inform citizens and maintain democracy, trust in government institutions, and or impact political accountability. Western Balkan governments have demonstrated serious commitments to the advancement of gender equality and women's empowerment, and these commitments have translated into national, subnational, and local gender policies and programs, as well as the establishment of gender institutional policies and institutional mechanisms, tasks to facilitate and coordinate the implementation of commitments on gender equality. However, due to budgetary constraints, most of the Western Balkan governments have not been able to achieve the desired outcome of this commitment, while some of these national and subnational machineries have very small budgets and even in some cases do not have funds for projects other than operational costs. For this reason, we need to advance. And before I go to the need, I would say that the idea of GRB developed out of a growing recognition that government budget, which commands substantial resources, are not gender neutral and therefore affect women and men differently. For this reason, we need to advance a more strategic approach in really looking at the government budgets, but also scrutinize budgetary process in terms of their adequacy for the needs of persons or groups with certain characteristics, including gender, and whether they ensure equal distribution of resources and create equal opportunities for all. Today, gender responsive budgeting is endorsed by more than 100 countries across the globe as an instrument in the ongoing struggle to make budget and policies more gender responsive. However, we are still facing challenges in full implementation of the principle by the budget and policy decision makers and reaching final beneficiaries of government budgets and policies as well as citizens. The knowledge and information sharing gap in the media contribute to this significantly. And we know this from the latest Global Media Monitoring Project report from 2020, which found that if nothing changes, it will take at least another 67 years to close the average gender equality gap in traditional news media. As per the same source, women only make up to 25% of the persons heard, read about, or seen in newspaper, television, and radio news. News stories are is unlikely to clearly challenge gender stereotypes today as they were 15 years ago. More than 45% of news stories reinforce gender stereotypes, while only 4% of stories clearly challenge gender stereotypes. In transnational media, women were only 13% of subjects and sources in the television newscast monitored and 21% in the digital news stories and tweet. We are therefore advancing our efforts to address the gender gap jointly with our media partners in the Western Balkans. Our partnership with the media is of great importance, as we believe that in the transformative role the media can play in achieving gender equality globally, including the Western Balkans, by creating gender-sensitive and gender-transformative content, challenging traditional social and cultural norms and attitudes, and by regularly showcasing examples of women in leadership roles on a range of topics. Some of the recommendations that we will hear today include that additional attention should be paid to equal presentation of women and men in media reports and ensure that they are equally represented as source of information that continues an in-depth coverage of the overall process related to budget drafting, adoption and execution is needed. That budget reporting should be more focused on what the people need and on the problems that they face on a daily basis, as solutions are often found in institutional budgets, and that media coverage can and should encourage citizens to follow process related to public finances and budget and show them how they can become involved and advocate for issues that matters to them, and then can generally contribute to the transparency of the public spending. All this work, it's been done in the framework of our regional gender responsive budgeting project, which is called Transformative Financing for Gender Equality towards more transparent, inclusive, and accountable governments in the Western Balkans, supported by Sweden. And I want to thank our donor, and I want to thank all of you for the participation of this webinar today, and I'm really looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lubani. And now we are going to, for the time ahead of us, look for a more precise idea of what the situation is like now. To be more precise, in the following 20 minutes, we'll be listening to the presentation of the research findings of the study on media reporting on gender responsive budgeting in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2020. Before we begin, I will take just a second more to remind you that any questions you might have regarding the findings of the study, please feel free to use the Q&A button and ask your questions, because we do have some time planned after the presentation for the debate on these questions. I would now like to invite the authors, Elvira Jukic-Mujkic and Selma Zulic, to begin their presentation.
Thank you, Hannah, so much for your announcement, and Ms. Lubani, thank you for such a great speech at the beginning and for pointing out the role of media in promoting gender equality and in promoting the importance of transformative budgeting. I'm Selma Zulic-Šiljak. I'm project coordinator in the Media Center Sarajevo, and together with Elvira Jukic-Mujkic and Anita Sokol, we worked jointly in cooperation with the UN Women Office in Bosnia and Herzegovina on the development of the study on media reporting. However, our idea today, since this is a quite technical discussion, was also to present you some of our dilemmas we had internally from the media point of view when it comes to developing the methodology for this topic. So I will just share the screen of the presentation, and as Hannah said, feel free to write questions in chat box, to reach out maybe after the discussion if you are interested in the topic and research findings. UN Women published this report as well, and it is available online. Well, first of all, when we skip to our dilemmas in preparing for this research, if we had a transcript of all our discussions internally and while going through a desk research, one of the keywords would be interdisciplinarity. So one of our approaches stemming out from the discussions with the UN Women media community and we had internally was that first of all, we need from the point of view of journalists and editors analyze this term gender responsive budgeting and what would it mean for from the media aspect. So the first thing we had to do is definitely focus on budgets. And when we are talking about budgets in journalism, we are talking about in B&H context, it would one of the first associations would be investigative journalism, tracking the public spending, public funds, and similarly, and in the theoretical framework, it would be economic journalism. So we had to reflect and discuss what is the state of economic journalism, what are the current challenges of the economic journalism, and especially focus on B&H literature and availability of expertise in this sector. The second important block was gender equality, meaning reporting on human rights and on gender issues, which among other things, with the support of UN Women in previous decades, created and we noticed and reached out to those journalists who engaged in different projects when it comes to reporting on gender issues, including reporting on gender-based violence, and realized that we need to use lessons learned and those expertise as well in drafting the methodology and making decisions about the approach. However, there were some really important aspects in these two blocks to consider. First of all, it was one of the turning points in economic journalism happening during the financial crisis in 2007-2008, when the global debate, but also on different levels, debate in the area of journalism started, whether the reporting on economic topics should be placed as part of the mainstream as daily news reporting, or should it be placed and thematized as specialized approach, meaning whether the only journalists who are specialized in reporting on economy subjects are the one who should continue working on this, or it should be part of the mainstream. And we could notice that there are two with the strong arguments schools basically in journalism advocating first that yes, the topics about the economy, businesses, topics explaining complex issues such as cause and effects of financial crisis should be part of the mainstream. And this was argument for this thesis was that the role of journalism is, among other, the important role of journalism is that it should educate the public and explain the complex notions to the public, especially also to those public that is not primarily interested in the subject, as it affects and because if it's not done in this way, it could expand the area to manipulate with those audience. In theory, it is called inattentive audience, and you heard about it, probably all of you. On this second argument that it should be kept as part of the specialized approach in journalism was that this kind of approach is number one, additional burden to daily newsrooms, and that it is not very easy to expect from the journalist who is working on the daily news that can actually explain all the complexity of inflations, crisis, and similar, especially we've done this research during the COVID-19 inflation, and now imagine how often this word is used in media. But on the other side, they also said, they argued that this kind of reporting can lead to that only negative news about the economic crisis are present in the media. It can cause panic and eventually lead to sensationalism. These two theoretical streams are joined around one same argument, that in the end they do say that we need to acknowledge that during the financial crisis, and when it comes to economic journalism, journalists are faced with the fact that even economic experts sometimes have difficulties explaining some of the causes and effects. However, that the role of journalists is, among other, to maintain their work in educating the public in this way or in another way, in order to meet the basic postulates of a democracy and to adequately inform citizens. So some of the approach in the end would be, like in many other cases in journalism as well, that the healthy balance is the best way to go forward, meaning to include also these topics in the newsrooms, but also to keep it as specialized form of reporting. When it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, we noticed, of course, that both kinds of reporting, the specialized mostly being part of investigative independent media outlets, while or the media outlets who are focused on reporting on economy and businesses. And we realized we need to reach out and engage with journalists and editors from both types of media outlets in order to seek for their opinion and advice in developing further methodology and our approach. Another important aspect to take in consideration was that this debate about placement of economic topics in journalism was not so much present in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the literature was very scarce in this point, but it was also something that provided us with additional motivation then to work on it further and to reach out to as many media experts as possible as well. Also, something that always should be taken in consideration, and that Ms. Lubani also mentioned in the introductory points, was this challenge faced by media in general, starting from lack of informal education and lack of specialized courses, focused thematic units, as well as understaffed newsrooms, lack of funds, competing for funds, and in the end, the competitiveness of this topic was also something we took into consideration, as it showed that when it comes to competitiveness of this topic in comparison to the daily politics in the society, such as in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we could estimate that it is low, but that it is something important and by correspondence from during this research recognized as such. My colleague Elvira Jukic-Mujkic will provide more concrete details on the findings of the research and recommendations stemming from it. Elvira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Selma. So this research was carried out from November 2021 to January this year, and the content that we analyzed is from 2020, as already mentioned. It was a combination of qualitative and quantitative research methods, which included content analysis, survey among journalists, and semi-structured interviews with experts in this field. The content analysis included 6 media outlets, 4 of them being mainstream online media outlets, and 2 of them being online magazines that are focused on reporting on finances and work of public institutions. And what we were looking for is the content that relates to budget allocation, budget adoption, and budget revision. The goal of the study was to provide answers to the questions on how much do media in Bosnia and Herzegovina cover this topic of gender responsive budgeting, and how do they do it? Another question that we were looking answers to is how much are journalists and editors informed actually about this approach to budget planning, and also we wanted to find out what are the training needs for journalists and editors in Bosnia and Herzegovina concerning coverage of gender responsive budgeting. The content analysis, when we were working on the content analysis, we took several parameters into account. That is format of the story. So, how was the story? What is the type of this content? Who is the author of the story? How was the story visualized? We also analyzed the topics and the quality of the topics and depthness of the topics and the sources of information for these articles on gender responsive budgeting. And also we wanted to figure out what is from which perspective and how is it framed when there is a story about budget adoption, and in which regard is gender responsive budgeting being mentioned, or where is this focus of gender responsive budgeting? How does it look if it exists? The purpose of the analysis was also to establish whether there are more male journalists than female journalists working on this topic, which we considered that it could be some kind of important parameter for us to understand this media reporting. And also we wanted to figure out in which sections are these news, are these stories about gender responsive budgeting being published, whether it's in some sections of daily news stories, or it's in some special economy related sections and so on. This questionnaire with journalists, we wanted to figure out when we asked journalists and editors about gender responsive budgeting, we wanted to check their knowledge actually, how much are they aware of gender responsive budgeting as a concept, as an approach to budget planning, and what are their needs and capacities in order to improve this and boost this reporting in this regard. So let me just say something about, just briefly about the role of media reporting on gender responsive budgeting. Within this research, we said that we actually recalled that media in Bosnia and Herzegovina could play an important role in promotion of gender equality, as well as in dissemination of information and raising public awareness about public policies, allocation of public budgets, and responsibility and transparency in the allocation of public budgets, and how does that relate to gender equality. Let me just remind you also that the Gender Action Plan in Bosnia and Herzegovina for the period of the past 4 years has recognized the media outlets as important actors that, given their great impact in social change and possible social change in society, they may speed up structural change towards gender equality through promotion of gender equality as a human rights principle. Media coverage of gender inequality and unfair budget allocations for the needs of women and men may be useful in raising the awareness of the public and in general, and exercising pressure on decision makers. However, this analysis that we did showed that actually media in Bosnia and Herzegovina are gender biased, and they transmit female and male stereotypes, and they rarely question gender stereotypes in this society. And actually, journalism as a profession in BNH is not immune to these discriminatory practices that contribute to gender inequality, and they range from low percentage of women in editorial and executive positions to differences in salaries and increasingly frequent practice of threatening and harassing female journalists. Some of the key findings in our research is that the media actually regularly cover budgetary processes. So on a daily basis, you can find an article, a report about some kind of event or some kind of topic or development that relates to budgetary processes in this country on many levels. So starting from municipal levels to cantonal to entity and state level governments. And we also determined in this research that journalists follow assembly sessions on all levels of government, and as well as other meetings. And in this regard, we concluded that perhaps media do not need additional resources to report on budgetary processes and to, in general, to follow the processes of budget adoption, but rather they need some kind of awareness and a more engaged principle in their field work and in analysis. We also pointed out in our report that journalists face numerous challenges in their daily work, especially if they decide to cover highly specialized topics. And this is one of the highly specialized topics in comparison to what Selma mentioned earlier, daily important stories on a daily basis, such as politics, economy, and some social developments. One of the key findings is also that in regard to this topic of reporting on gender responsive budgeting is that this issue of competitiveness that Selma briefly mentioned of these topics in editorial decisions on allocation of human and other resources. And also another additional challenge is that there aren't enough relevant interlocutors on this matter, as even in the institutions that would normally that we as journalists would normally expect to find experts. Even such institutions, public institutions, do not have sufficiently aware experts and staff who could speak about gender responsive budgeting. In general, the media do cover budget, but in a generalized way, and mostly approach the issue in the same manner as politicians or decision makers or government officials approach the topic. Another problem that we pointed out in the research after the analysis is that the fact that most journalists cover budgets only in their final phase. So most of these reports that we analyzed actually were about how the budget was adopted. So the very act of adopting the budget, which party was against the budget and which party voted for. And it was all in some kind of coat of political developments during that year. And let me remind you that this 2020 was a year of local elections and also the pandemic in Bosnia and Herzegovina, when a lot of, like, almost all the budgets on all levels were were changed in some way to reallocate funds for to fight consequences of the pandemic. So there were a lot of content to analyze, but most of that content was actually about which party was for, which was against, which is again in this coat of daily political wranglings of that we can read, even if it's not a story about budget processes. So one of our main conclusions when it comes to this content analysis is that gender responsive budgeting is exceptionally rarely recognized as a topic in Bosnia and Herzegovina media, primarily because this approach is not frequently used by those who prepare, analyze, discuss, and adopt budgets at all government levels in BNH. We concluded that from the media content that we analyzed, that not even these politicians or decision makers, they don't know enough about, or they don't mention in gender responsive budgeting enough so that journalists could, in a way, be aware of this principle from what they're saying, from what the decision makers are saying. Content analysis in this research has also shown that only a handful of articles do mention gender responsive budgeting as a planning principle of budgets, but there were no thematic or in-depth articles about the issue in this observed period. This indicates a lack of awareness about the importance of public budgets as instruments for promotion of gender equality in B&H, but also it indicates the lack of initiative from within the media outlets and a lack of interest in asking questions about this method of promotion of gender equality in our country when they are analyzing the budgets. Topics related to economy and operation of public institutions and those related to public finance and management are present in B&H media, as I said, on a daily basis, particularly when they are a subject of political discussions and disputes. However, this manner of reporting on budgets and finances in general can be understood as extremely superficial, mostly as coverage in some form of news without in-depth analysis, investigative stories and longer formats that might explain such topics to the public in a more accessible way, in a more understanding way, or even educative way are extremely rare. The survey among journalists that I mentioned earlier showed actually that 40% of journalists that we questioned said that they were not familiar with gender responsive budgeting at all. And only 10% of them said that they covered some story that had something to do with gender responsive budgeting, but those were very rare occasions. The analysis also showed that 90% of analyzed articles were not signed. I also want to remind you that we only analyzed online media, and not signing the articles is very common practice in online media in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But there were some articles that were signed, which indicates that this author who worked on the article, on the analysis, they signed the name because it was a kind of a product of a longer or more in-depth work. Around 80% of analyzed content was written in the form of news, so those were mostly shorter forms of reporting. And when it comes to sources of information on stories that we analyzed, those were mostly, if we had to sum it up, those would mostly be men from government positions. Coverage of political disputes was quite frequently the context of media coverage of budget adoption and budget revision. 1/3 of all the articles that we analyzed was actually about political disputes, where budget adoption or budget allocation was only, a matter of these disputes. In total, we analyzed 431 articles. And out of those 431 articles, only 8 were in some way referred to gender responsive budgeting. Out of those 8, 5 articles mentioned maternity allowances or financial support for female entrepreneurs, whereas 3 articles just used this phrase gender responsive budgeting in the passing. So this is a very short overview of the research that we did. As Selma mentioned, it was published by UN Women, so you can read it over there for more details. I will just mention some of the recommendations for the media that we had, that we stated out at the beginning, at the end of the report. We said that a continuous and in-depth coverage of the overall process related to budget drafting, adoption, and execution is needed. So not just to report about the final phase that the budget is adopted, but actually it would be important for the journalists and editors to follow budget processes from the beginning, to follow discussions on the budget and how is it created and planned and so on. And also we said that it is necessary to create harmonized training models and to maintain the continuity of training for journalists interested in reporting on economic and gender equality issues. There were some training organized by Media Center and UN Women recently, but it is important to continue such trainings. Practical examples should be used in media reporting in order to explain what is gender responsive budgeting, in order to explain what is this principle to the general public, but also to, in a way, educate and inform other journalists who would potentially report on this topic. We also said in the recommendations part that the coverage of gender responsive budgeting should be improved and expanded to include more than just stereotypical roles of women, such as this one that I mentioned at the end, the maternity leaves, this kind of budget spending. And more on the recommendations, please see in the report published by UN Women. I'm happy to receive any questions in the Q&A, and I believe that now we are, we use our time, right, Hannah?
Yes, you have used your time and the time for the discussion as well. But if any of the participants have the need to ask any questions, they can still do it, and we might leave some time at the end of the conference for the potential answers. So yeah, that's a note. And because of the agenda that we have and sticking to the time, I will thank you for the presentation you have given us. I must say that the finding about only 8 out of 431 articles in some way are treating gender responsive budgeting, or the fact that budgets concern both genders is really depressing, I must say. But we will be hearing during the rest of the conference how it's possible to work directly with journalists. We'll be hearing about experiences of journalists making stories and now putting the bar higher when it comes to the number of stories treating this topic. So yes, let's move on with that. Now, for the following 5 minutes, I would like you to pay your attention. We will be hearing a lightning talk about what makes a good gender-responsive budgeting story. It is actually already delivered through a video message by a journalist, Slađan Tomić, who kind of brings us a sense of the atmosphere in his work while creating these stories. So yes, let's take a look at that.
Hello everyone, I'm Slađan Tomić, freelance journalist from Sarajevo. I have been working as a journalist for 7 years, but I have not dealt with issues of gender-responsive budgeting before. In fact, I didn't even know what gender-responsive budgeting was until I went to a seminar organized by UN Women and Media Center Sarajevo. By learning about budgets and how budget can be gender responsive, especially about the benefits of it, I gained basic knowledge about gender responsive budgeting and how media can report on it. When I decided to do a story on gender responsive budgeting, it turned out to be a real challenge. In fact, there aren't many budgets in BiH that are gender responsive. Complex administrative structure of Bosnia and Herzegovina, entities, cantons was not helpful at all. So I focused on local level, on municipalities. The search was long and complex, and when I got the information that the budget of Žepče municipality is to some extent gender responsive and that this municipality is more active generally in terms of gender mainstreaming, I started preparing for the topic and contacting the sources. I was lucky to find expert in municipality that provide me with details on how they advocated for better budget distribution. It is important to note that nowhere in the budget does it say that it is gender responsive. It doesn't explicitly state that anywhere. How do I know that this budget is gender responsive then? Well, because when awarding public budgets grants to business, women have an advantage. When applying for grants, women automatically have an advantage of 5 points. This was specific for Žepče municipality. Apart from that, when I talked to women, they told me that their businesses came to life only when they registered that business in their own name. They say that when their partners were the business owners, they had fewer opportunities to get grants and assistance. Therefore, the most important thing is that it is evident from the budget that some budget item is intended for women or for the improvement of women's lives. From journalist point of view, it's opened a lot of new questions and themes that I can work on in the future. I hope that my experience will be useful to you and encourage you to start writing about gender responsible budgeting too. Hello everyone, I'm Slađan Tomić, freelance journalist from Sarajevo. I have
Okay, thank you, Slađan, for letting us know what your precise experience was like, and for basically showing us the path of from learning about the term for the first time to kind of experiencing the whole field experience where you need to get very clear answers to the questions regarding gender responsive budgeting. We will also hear another experience delivered to us by a journalist who works on these topics, presented from the angle of media education in gender responsive budgeting, a trained journalist's perspective. I now invite Hilma Onkic, who is a journalist included in the project, to tell us about her experience, and then we will have a brief discussion as well.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. I would like to thank Media Center and UN Women for having me here today. My name is Hilma Onkic. I've been working as a journalist for more than 10 years, and at this moment I'm freelance, and I also work as a communication officer and consultant. During my experience, I always found different workshops and training activities to be really useful when it comes to improvement of my journalistic and editorial skills. And I have to say that the training organized by Media Center and UN Women was actually one of the most useful training that I attended. Although I somehow I reflect on gender equality and the concept of discrimination based on gender on a daily basis, and this is something that actually keeps me always busy. I must admit that the concept of gender responsive budgeting was something that I was not quite familiar with before attending the training. So a few sessions were mostly useful for me, and they were actually focused on what Slađan already mentioned in his video. They were focused on complex structure of and complex organization of different budgeting procedures across the country. So the model that was dedicated to budgeting proceedings and how everything is being organized in our country when it comes to financial and institutional framework was actually very useful, and it was quite helpful to get opportunity to ask questions and to discuss this topic with an expert such as Leila was. Introductory model, even though I am quite familiar with the concept of gender equality and gender-based discrimination, it was also useful because a speaker introduced us to numerous of publications, numerous of different materials and resources that we as journalists can use when writing different stories related to human rights. Unfortunately, in both cases, journalists covering human rights lack knowledge on complex structure of budgeting procedures in our country, but also many stories covering human right related issues do lack the aspect of I would say, some evidence-based background, such as information on statistics, on some research findings or numbers. So it is quite useful to have these publications that we can reach out when we need. And of course, practical work was one of the most interesting part of the training, since we were challenged to do our small-scale research and actually to see how budget documents are being organized, how we can look at different budget lines, and how these budget lines and budget documents can be important source and actually serve us as a basis for future stories. So I would mention that during the training, I remember we were looking at one municipality's budget, and we thought how we noticed the budget line covering costs of travel expenses for informal education of municipalities' administrative workers. So we thought it would be really interesting to see how many women use these funds and how many men use these funds, and to somehow connect this issue with the general issue that women do not have enough time or enough support to pursue their education after the formal one. One of my latest story was focused on men that suffering from prostate cancer in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I focused mainly on stigma, on the fact and actually general opinion that men need to be strong, that they don't need to care for their health as much as women. So I wanted to hear more from men to see what is their experience, why they do not take preventive examinations when it comes to prostate. And I also talked to men who are fighting cancer or who are survivors. I also talked to different health institutions. I talked to CSOs, and I collected information on different informations on statistics, numbers, backgrounds, information on disease itself. And after I finished the story, I realized that I would actually most probably need to write another story, because in the future I would like to focus on this story from gender responsive budgeting perspective. So at this point, I'm still thinking how I'm going to do it, but the things that I would like to explore would be, is it maybe the low number of men having examinations done due to the cost of examination itself, how the budget is being distributed when it comes to health insurance, and how much does the health insurance institutions actually cover in percentage of these examinations. Another thing that I think it would be quite interesting is to see how much of the public funds is being distributed for awareness raising campaigns that actually try to encourage men to take care of their health, and especially when it comes to their reproductive health. So those would be the next steps. I believe that we are going to discuss what I could do and whom I could contact. But in general, I think that the topic and the perspective of gender responsive budgeting is really important. And what journalists would need is, first of all, to have editors who are familiar with the topic, who are patient to give us enough time to do on these topics. And of course, that means to give us resources in terms of maybe letting us to do one quality story instead of 3 or 4 less quality stories. So yeah, that's for now for me. And Hannah, if you have any questions.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Hilma. Can we get back to what you just spoke about, the way you would develop this story about cancer prevention further on? Now, could you tell us what would the collection of these information regarding gender responsive budgeting look like? Practically, where would you look for information and what kind of information would it be?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would need to contact ministries of health on entity levels and then on cantonal levels. I would need to see how much they actually are focused on the issue of preventive examinations when it comes to prostate cancer. But I think that the most important thing when it comes to this issue is to contact also health insurance institutions. And the first step would be to see if there is any canton or maybe 2 or 3 that are significantly worse compared to others, where maybe men need to pay everything for themselves. And then I will focus on that specific canton or 2 or 3, and I would look at the budgets of those cantons. I would look how much money is being distributed to health insurance institutions. And I would try to see if there are some more concrete budget lines that actually provide us information where and how the money is being divided. But I think that I would need to stay in close communications with health insurance institutions, because I think that the money is being transferred to them, but most likely they are in charge of distributing the money when it comes to services that they can cover. However, when it comes to health-related stories, my experience is that they are really, for me, they are the hardest one to work on, because now I have some perspective and I see how I could do everything, what would be the first, second, third step, final steps. But in reality, I mean, it is really hard to determine who is in charge in our country for what segment, and it is sometimes really hard when it comes to who will be answering my questions at all. And also when it comes to documents, online available documents are often not accurate one, or they lack some information. So when asking institutions for current budget or any other document, sometimes that can take a while. So I think that would be a quite challenging part to find people who can actually give me the right answers. And that's why I mentioned that it is the most important thing to have enough time, because sometimes when working on health-related stories, you think you can do a story in 1 week, but then you work on it for months.
Yes, thank you very much, Hilma. As you mentioned, very complex topic overall for people from the region. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have, correct me if I'm wrong, 12 ministries of health, each per entity, and then 10 for cantons. And as you've said, you would, at the end of the day, a journalist needs a lot of time and all of the resources available from his or her editors to be able to produce a high quality story. Thank you very much, Hilma, for sharing your experiences and for sharing the idea on how to move forward with the story. I hope that you're going to do it, because it's a really important story and I haven't seen anyone deal with it here in such a way so far. So thank you. In the following minutes of the conference, we will be moving back to the region. We will be having a regional panel discussion where we will get insights from countries of the region on what's the state of reporting on gender through numbers, We do have 4 countries covered, but also we have participants who are listening this from other countries of the Western Balkans. So please, with any questions or comments, feel free to join us in this discussion. I will briefly introduce the panelists. We have Selma Ucan-Barlic, who is a journalist from Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have Dafina Lata from Kosovo, who is a freelance journalist. Aurora Šulčev from Albania, journalist at A2 CNN, and Milica Janjatovic from Novi Sad School of Journalism from Serbia. So thank you for joining us here today to speak about this important topic. And Aurora, I would like to begin with a question for you. And could you try to provide us with an insight of what's the situation in Albania like? To what extent do you estimate that there is awareness of gender responsible budgeting, and can people really understand what does it mean on a practical level? You need to unmute, we can't hear you.
I'm okay. Do you listen to me now?
Yes.
Hello, Anna. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Aurora Šulčev from Albania. As Hannah said, I work as a journalist from 22 years now. Actually, I am executive producer for business at A2 CNN, the affiliate of CNN in Albania. Also, I am author and anchor of TV program A2 Business, 2 times a week, prime time. In all my professional life, I focused in the economy sector. So the issue connected with gender responsive budgeting is something that I do every day mostly, because all the economy sector is connected with the budgeting, with the finance public, but also with the problems of women in Albania, and not only in the business, as the case that our colleague bring to us, but also in the different area and sector of the economy. I have the same problem that Selma said before with young journalists. Almost in Albania, we haven't much journalists focused in the economy sector, and this is a problem because it's a difficult sector, and the juniors has difficulty to understand and to be involved in this sector. So we have this problem, and we have the problem to explain the issue of economy sector, and especially the gender responsive budgeting. But I want to share with you my experience, the bad thing and the good thing about what happened in Albania. I can say that in Albania during this year we had a successful story, because the gender responsive budgeting is included in public finance management, and this is very important. As a result of legal and institutions for changing, also with the support of UN Women, also is a successful story, because we have now 45 programs focused on gender responsive budget. 8 years before, we had only 8 programs. We have now enough financials. For example, we have 9% of GDP for planned budget, and this is one of the most found of all the region. And this is the good thing. But however, there are a lot of things to do, because in Albania we are doesn't understand the equal between the men and the women. We have a patriarchal society, and I think that the big problem in Albania and the big obstacle is the widespread view that the woman's role is not equal as a man's. This is the problems. I work a lot with my journalists, but not only with my staff, also with the other colleagues, to explain the problems of the budget and the gender budget, and what is important to know the problem of the women, not for making for giving the equal access to as a man to the public services, and to also to eliminating an unequal to the public sphere. It's difficult, but I can say that now the people are more sensitive about the things, and almost when in reality in Albania there are developments connected with gender equality.
Thank you very much, Aurora, for giving us this insight. We will definitely, in another round, come back to you to see about how this progress was made, among other things. I would now like to ask Dafina, what is her experience in, and how would you in general describe the challenges that journalists in Kosovo face when dealing with gender equality? The latest events and protests in Kosovo are speaking to us and telling that this is a socially necessary topic. Also, please unmute. We can't hear you, so please unmute, Dafina. Great.
Okay, Hannah?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hear me?
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, wait. I'm Dafina. I'm a journalist. I work now, freelance journalist. Thank you for the invitation to the panel. It's a pleasure for me. Thank you for question, Hannah. Now, first I will talk about the challenges of journalists. Journalists and activists reporting on gender equality in Kosovo face challenges. In my article in the Confessions of Journalists, I realized that the topic of gender equality issue started to be part of the media more recently, but work is difficult because most media in Kosovo are led by men. For me, it's not okay, but this is true. Confessions of abused women, it's are sensitive, make it more difficult.
Thank you very much, Dafina. What you mentioned about the ownership of media is also an important topic when it comes to the general picture of why and how do media address which topic. I will get back to you, Dafina, in the following round. I would like to hear from Milica now, and let's switch a bit to the idea of how available information on this topic are anyway. What's the situation in Serbia regarding the availability of information on the basis of which the media could deal with the topic of gender responsive budgeting?
Good afternoon, everyone. From my side, it is a great pleasure to have a chance to discuss with you about this important topic. And I think that this topic is not sufficiently present in our public discourse. So I hope that we will all have a chance to learn something new and find some solutions for our common challenges. So the situation in Serbia is that we started with the implementation of gender responsive budgeting in 2016. And since that year, our coordinating body for gender equality of the government of the Republic of Serbia publishes annual progress reports on how the budget users on the state level implemented GRB goals. So the parliament, the government, ministries, government offices, etc. And these reports show how budget users implemented GRB through indicators which go through gender negative interventions to gender sensitive and positive, and finally to gender transformative interventions. So this is the state level. And when we talk about municipality level, there is a bit challenging situation because municipalities do not publish their GRB analysis on a year level. and we cannot see clear information, but we have to look at GRB goals set for the next year, then wait that this budget is realized, look at final budget reports the next year, and then compare them to budget GRB goals that were set the previous year. So you can see from that journalists need to have a lot of experience and knowledge in order to know how to look through all the necessary information, financial and economic data, etc. And our journalists they need those capacities and need additional education in order to provide a good story and a good analytical media piece. Another challenge is that municipalities don't always publish all the necessary information. And then if a journalist needs those additional information in order to arrange the story and complete the story, the situation is the most probably institution will not respond to their questions. So that is a big challenge, but I can say that the good situation in all of this is that there are several organizations that monitor implementation of GRB on the local level. So they could be a kind of support to all of their media outlets and journalists who want to write the story and don't have the answer from the public institutions. It could be helpful. But as a final remark, I could say that probably the availability of information from public institutions currently is not the biggest challenge, because we have the complete lack of media interest to report on these topics. So there are certain information that are publicly available that could be a good start for the media story, but media are the one that needs to put the pressure on the institutions to ask them to be more transparent, to provide more information. And that is the only way. Institutions will not do it by themselves. The media has to do it. So it is a bit challenging. It is, even though implementation started 7 years ago, but media are still not aware of the necessity to report on the subject. And as I could here in the previous presentation, the similar situation is in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I am very glad that I had the opportunity to hear that, because I suppose that the similar situation is in Serbia. We haven't conducted a research, but we can see from the experience that the situation is very similar.
Yes, thank you very much, Milica. And you mentioned the lack of media interest in reporting about this topic, and that's something we will definitely discuss for the rest of this panel. But before that, I would like to go to Selma. Selma Ucambarlic was also a part of this project and did some stories on gender responsive, actually from an angle of gender responsive budgeting. Now, Selma, my question for you would be in relation to working on these stories. We've heard at the presentation of the findings from Elvira at the beginning that there are very few interlocutors in the institutions who are able to discuss the topic of gender responsive budgeting. Now, I would like to hear about your experience. Is there, and to what extent, institutional openness for media reporting on gender responsive budgeting? And do the institutions perceive this as an important topic for the public and for the media space?
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to share my experience with you. As Hannah said, I'm a freelance journalist from Sarajevo with 10 years of experience in investigative journalism. Before I answer to your question, I just need to tell you that I have a problem with the internet. Just before the event, there was an infrastructure failure in the area, so I hope so to stay with you till the end. In my experience, the topic of gender responsive budgeting is not recognized by institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina as a topic of significant public interest. There is no single institution or source in Bosnia and Herzegovina where we could find information on all gender responsive programs, as Hilma previously said, and also Slađan Tomić in his video. Journalists who reports on the topic face numerous obstacles in institutions to get even basic information. My impression is that institutions do not intentionally prevent the access to this data, but they are simply unaware that it is necessary to make data public and that it is actually their obligation. Access to information to the on gender responsive budgeting is the same as access to the other types of information. But I noticed that a significant number of employees in institutions in Bosnia do not understand what the gender programs are. So we need to make an extra effort to explain to the employees in the institution what we are searching for, or to find the officials who understand the issue, and only after that to start looking for necessary information. So in a short, I would say that there is no institutional awareness of the importance of this topic in Bosnia, but there are individuals in some institutions who really understand and who recognize the that it's important to talk about it and to provide information to the public. Access to information in Bosnia is certainly made difficult by the complex state regulation and the fact that we have many institutions. A higher level of governments means that it is much more complicated to get the necessary information.
Thank you very much, Selma, for providing us with insight in your experience on what is the role, the current state of role of the institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina when speaking of these topics. I would now, before actually going with the second round, just a reminder, please, for all the participants, feel free to use the Q&A for any questions or comments you might have. Now back
Hannah, I have a question for Selma. It's very interesting. In which administration have the problem to explain the gender responsive budgeting? In the central administration, or?
You mean on which level is a problem? The higher level of government is much complicated. So if you are searching some information on a local level, it is much easier, because on the local level, if you have a list with the 6, 10, 20 names, you can alone really easy contact them and find them all. But when you have very extensive programs with thousands and thousands of beneficiaries, it's really hard to find the concrete examples. And you just need some kind of assistance from the institution, and then we face with the other challenges.
Thank you, Selma.
Thank you.
Thank you for this question and this answer. Let's speak about the media interest in the topic of gender responsive budgeting in general. Aurora, you cooperate with media in Albania, you work in one, you have your own show. What would you say? You mentioned in the first part that there is a growth of success in dealing with the topic, but what about media interest? Does it also grow through time?
Indeed, Anna, the interest of the media is growing regarding the issue of gender responsive budgeting, but also in the case where something happened in our reality in Albania. If we have problems, for example, with women in business, in that moment the focus is more there, and we covered the things happen with gender budgeting. In daily work, the interesting is lower, and the journalist doesn't interesting to cover the issue like that. But I think we have another problems, and also recommendation. What can you do better in this field? In Albania, we have the problem with the women that has a voice in the opinion public. I want to share with you my experience. I try a lot to find women in my studio to take the panelists, because the women refused me a lot of times because for a lot of reasons. I think one of them is because they don't want to afraid the aggression from the men in the studio, because unfortunately in Albania the studio, the TV are the domain of the men. The most of the panelists are men, so they afraid to be part of this studio, and I think this is a problem of our women. And also I work a lot to convince them to be part, because I think they are more professionals than the men in their field of expertise, and I can explain why they felt sometimes unsure about their arguments to share and to be part of the public opinion. I think that these women must have a more active role in the society, also to be a role model in the media. So these women can help us journalists to bring to the face of the public and to discuss more about the things that are connected with family, with equally gender. So I think this is a problem, and I work a lot to fix it. I don't know I'm successful in this field, but I never give up. I don't know if you have any questions.
Thank you for this, Aurora. I mean, yes, you are completely right. Having more women as interlocutors for our topic is also something that is definitely important when we speak about gender equality. And then we also always have the presumption that women will be more sensible towards the specific topic of gender responsive budgeting, even though we should have equal sensibility from both men and women. Milica,
because Anna, I can explain in my word that women, it's more easy for them to be part of the TV program in the morning that are talking about soft issue, instead of talking with for things economy, inflation, incomes, review, balance, growth, everything. I know a lot of women, Albanian women, also in the region, international, they are very good in this field, but they refuse to be part of the debate, public debate. And for me, this is a bad news and a bad thing that doesn't help us in our mission to talk more about the gender responsive budgeting.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for sharing that experience, Aurora. Now let's see what the situation like in Serbia. Milica, you've already mentioned the topic of media interest. Now, is there, and in what amount would you say there is media interest in Serbia? You mentioned the years that have passed by. Has it changed? Is it rising? Is it falling? And do journalists from highly ethical and professional newsrooms actually manage to analyze the distribution of public money through the dimension of gender responsibility?
Well, as I mentioned before, we don't have any research report to support this, what I'm going to say, but our organization conducts media monitoring on different topics every few months. So I have an overview of what the topics are and what are media covering, especially in the sense of budget, economics, etc. So based on that, I can tell that there is no media interest in reporting on budget with the dimension of gender responsive budgeting. And I can think of several reasons why this could be the case. First of all, low level of knowledge and awareness of journalists about the GRB process in general, what does it mean, who should implement that, etc., and about the importance of reporting on the topics. And I can tell you that based on our small sample, we conducted 3 trainings for 30 journalists in November and December last year. And at the beginning of trainings, we gave them tests in order to measure the improvement of their knowledge. And the questions in the tests were basic GRB question, what it is, who should implement it, what are the consequences, etc. And the average success on the test was gaining between 2.5 and 3.5 scores out of possible 13. So there was almost none knowledge of GRB process whatsoever. So based on that, I can tell that media does not have capacity or knowledge about the GRB process. And based on that, I can tell that those reasons are interrelated. And if you ask me what is the solution for all of that, I would say run more educational activities for journalists, but also run campaigns, awareness raising campaigns, in order to put pressure on the media and to start covering these topics, because the situation in Serbia is complicated when we talk about media. We have extreme polarization of the media scene. We have the majority of media who support the government, and we have small amount of media who are critical towards the government. And if we are talking about the budget, those who support the government will talk about populist measures, for example, giving money to citizens during the COVID crisis. And if you talk about media that are critical towards the government, they will discuss topics such as potential crime and corruption cases. They will criticize financial solutions of the Ministry of Finance, etc. But the budget distribution, what consequences it has to ordinary citizens, I think that this is not a big topic for any media, and it is rarely on a media agenda in Serbia, unfortunately. I don't blame the media. I think that lack of awareness and knowledge are the main reasons, but I don't know. I think that there is a lot of work ahead of us in order to change that.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Milica. What you've said. I mean, the topic in general seems like something that should naturally be an interest of the media, because it concerns literally half of the society, one or the other, where the media works. So yes, probably a higher degree of awareness is one of the, and education definitely is one of the ways to achieve this. Selma, I would like to go back to you. I hope your internet connection is stable and good. Something similar to what Milica told, not really in the context of media polarization, but given the fact that we have this daily political dynamics in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially, for example, in the last couple of days with the pre-election campaign, but without it as well, would you say that the journalists have the editorial freedom and the financial security to pay more attention to the topic of gender responsive budgeting outside of these, let's say, specific project circumstances?
Yes, I would say that journalists have a freedom to deal with these topics, and it's recognized as an important topic in some media. This is also confirmed by the fact that many media take over such a story from the other media outlets. But the impossibility of the fast realization of the original media reports, and of course, a lack of knowledge, affects how media will deal with these topics. I don't think it's realistic to expect an editor to set aside 7 days for a journalist to just call institution and try to find some basic information. A more proactive approach by the institution would certainly increase the number of the original media reports, because serious media reports, in-depth article, investigative article really take time. But certainly there is a possibility for journalists in the context of daily reporting on budgets to pay more attention to gender responsive budgeting. This is something that's generally missing in the media environment in Bosnia and Herzegovina. For example, when journalists report on adoption on a budget on some level, nothing prevents them to ask authorities on the gender aspects of the budget. If the authorities don't know anything about it, that is also a story. So I would say that for now, the project support is still needed, but it is necessary to improve the proactivity and transparency of institution, because from my experience, it is the most difficult part of this job.
Thank you, Selma. Listening to all of you basically makes me understand that this is a topic kind of made out of pillars, very connected to each other. The education and the awareness is not enough if there is no data availability that will provide the journalists with an opportunity within a reasonable amount of time to work with the data. So there truly needs to be an improvement on different fronts when it comes to dealing with this topic.
Yes, definitely on different fronts.
Yes. Dafina, another question for you regarding exactly availability of data when we speak about Kosovo. What is the situation with availability of data there? And speaking, of course, precisely about gender responsive budgeting, is there publicly available and transparent data on how the allocation of public money affects men or women? Is there media interest in dealing with this topic? Also, please unmute again. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Hannah. There is no data or very little, but according in the research, we have realized that the budget divided into institutions is not made in the same form. Men are paid more than women. It's not okay, but it's true. But this topic is not priority of the media in Kosovo. In addition to platforms that report on gender equality topics. But no data transparency or very, very little.
Thank you very much, Dafina. As we see, things do not differ very much anywhere in the region. The part of the pillars we are speaking about is, of course, the public, the society in general, and how important they perceive the topic to be and how aware they are that this is a thing that affects daily lives of both genders. So Milica, in that context, what do you think? How aware the society is of the importance of equal distribution of public money in the context of gender roles?
Well, I think if you ask a concrete citizen whether he or she has a certain problem and would it be better if money would be allocated in a different way, probably they would all say, yes, I agree with that, and this is unnecessary measure. But if we ask, what do you think about gender responsive budgeting and about all of that process, I think that general public don't have a clue what are we talking about because media don't report about that. So I told you before what was the level of knowledge of journalists about the GRB process and what does it mean. And if journalists are the citizens who are the most informed of all of our citizens, then we cannot expect that general public knows anything about the process, how it's going, what are the consequences, etc. So I think that situation is not good. Everyone knows and feels inequality in their own skin, but I don't think that they're informed enough about the process, about the mechanisms to achieve gender equity and all those things that go with gender responsive budgeting. So I would say again that first we need to put pressure on the media to start reporting socially responsible when we talk about budget, and in that way general public will be acquainted with all those general terms and conditions what need to be done in the sense of budget and in order to achieve gender equality.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Milica. Now, when we speak of the purpose of media reporting on the topic of gender responsive budgeting, not only it is important for the public to be aware, but it also in a way should influence the decision makers to be, to make the budget planning more gender responsible. So back to you, Aurora, with the question of, is there an influence of media coverage on those who make the decisions about the budget in a way to make the budget more gender responsible?
Yes, the reaction of all the actors of what media transmit or show is positive. The fact that we have an increase of gender budget during this year, that means that the media has made good work in this field. But we have a lot of things to do yet, because I think we need more information. Also, the young journalist needs to have more information about the gender responsive budgeting, to know more about the different line of financials for women, for example, grants or different sector, what are the possibilities, and to do more about the gender equality, gender budgeting. But also I think that we need to share this information in a professional way, so we'll be more professionals, and the reaction of the experts who had the impact on budget decision making can be positive in this way. I think we are making good steps, but we have to do yet.
Thank you very much, Aurora. Definitely a lot of work ahead of all of us when it comes to this topic. Selma, I would like to go back to you again. We spoke briefly about the importance of people in the institutions and how they might or might not be informed, more likely might not be informed about the topic of gender responsive budgeting. And these are the people who are important for every journalistic story. So how would you describe your experience of looking for interlocutors for the topic of gender responsive budgeting in the institutions, but also outside of the institutions? And would you say that a clear path exists when a journalist wants to deal with the topic of gender responsive budgeting by using only information that are publicly available?
In the short, on your second question, the answer would be no, but I will explain. During the work on the stories, my focus was to investigate the gender budgets at the level of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is one of two entities in the country. I could find very minimal information on the institution's website. So I had to call all ministries and all other institutions I assume may have such programs and get information that way. I spent 7 days to get that basic information and to find out which institution had the gender programs in the last 2 years. After I was mapping all gender programs in the Federation, I looked for specific beneficiaries of the funds. So this was also very difficult because the program was very extensive with the thousands of users on different grounds. So from those lists, even if they are published on websites, it's not possible to find specific examples in a reasonable time. But institutions are generally not open to provide assistance in this field. They usually ask you to send them requests for free access to information. Also, they very strictly interpret the law on the protection of personal data. So I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy to explain to the officers in the institution that the name of the beneficiaries of public funds isn't some kind of secret information and something like that. So I found examples for my stories through my source in institution, and also thanks to officials in institution who really understand that it's important to talk about it and to provide information to the public. But the a second challenge for me is to find the adequate officials in the institution. So the officials who really understand the issue, who knows the programs, and who can provide me the all information during the interviews. But I followed at the end, but it was also very, very difficult. Reporting on the topic based only on the available information, it's not easy, especially at the high level of the government, as I mentioned previously. If you do it locally, it is much easier because at the local level, you had smaller programs with just fewer beneficiaries, so you can very easily find them and contact them all. But at the higher level of the government, you simply had a list with the 2,000 or 3,000 names of the beneficiary, and it's almost impossible to find ones that match what you are looking for. So as a conclusion, I would say the better sorting of data in the institution, the publication of statistical indicators, more proactivity and transparency would certainly provide the easier reporting on this topic.
I would just like to stick with you a minute longer. At the beginning, I said that we have journalists and editors from the whole region participating in today's conference. So if some of them at this point are thinking about going with creating a story on gender responsive, including the dimension of gender responsive budgeting, what would you say, according to your experience, what is the best place to start? Because it is very complicated, as you've just described. What were your ideas on how to start dealing with this topic?
For me, the start is always in the institution. The start is always, so before that you need to know, you need to understand the structure of the country, you need to understand the institution, you need to know where to find information. For me, it's not a problem because I have a 10 years experience in investigative journal, so I understand every institution, I know the laws, I know how to talk with the employees, I know the regulation, the court practicing. So I think that it's important that the journalists know all of this, so to be able to finish the story. But the other possibility is that institution to be more proactive. So if they provide more information, if they want to help to the journalists, it would be much easier, and you don't need to know the case law practice. You don't need to know the old laws and etc. etc.
I think the first step is to identify the problem, but to identify good the problem, to know all the parts, and after that to build the schema to investigate this problem and to take information from the sources. But if a journalist don't know very well the problem, the impact of the problem, they can go to the institutions to take information. They will be very clear for themselves, and after that to work with the others and to show the story with the public. This is for me.
While you're here, Aurora, what do you think next to this is important for a journalist to have in a means of resources to be able to deal with these topics, editorial support, time? What would you say are the most important things?
I think that for make a good story in every sector, not only in gender responsive budgeting, I think that the journalist needs time, but also need the support of their colleagues and the support of the newsroom in general, because they need protection. Especially in the case of investigation, as Selma says in her daily work, and especially in this case needs the support and the help of the other colleagues, because if you haven't a source regarding one one point of the stories that you are working for, you have colleagues that have on sources in this institution, so he can help you with the information. But sometimes it's not an individual work, but also a teamwork, and I think for that is very important to have the protection and all the support of the other colleagues as newsroom. Not only the editor-in-chief or executive producer, but all the staff.
Thank you very much, Aurora. Dafina, the same question for you. What do you think a journalist needs to have in order to be able to, in the sense of resources, in order to be able to report on gender issues? Also, please, and yes, thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. First time I will talk about the challenges of journalists. Reporting is very difficult because story is very, very sensitive, and make it more difficult because sorry, but most media say again because most media in Kosovo are led by men, and very, very difficult and job and journalist in Kosovo. It's my thing.
Thank you very much, Dafina, for this answer as well. I will just let you know about the question and actually the comment that we got in the Q&A section from Anida Sokol. She says, thanks a lot for such a great discussion and such an important topic. And her question is, what are the best formats and styles for stories dealing with gender responsible budgeting? Is it explanatory journalism, investigative journalism, solutions journalism, videos, long reads, infographics, and how to include this topic in everyday news reporting? So any volunteers to answer the question?
That depends on the topics or of the story that you will develop. That not we haven't an exactly idea for that. I can say that if I'm talking about women in business, it's better a video, or it's better an article, or it's better ethnographic, for example. I think that depends, or an investigation article. I think that depends on the topics.
Thank you, Aurora. Milica, you also had something to say about this.
Yes, I wanted just to give you a brief answer to previous question about what journalists need in this process of creating GRB stories. I could share with you our experience when we implemented our project that is similar to yours in Media Center. When we conducted our trainings for journalists, then we chose 5 of them to write the stories, GRB stories, and we provided them with mentor support from our experts. So I think that this is the crucial measure in this process when they are entering a new field, and something about something new in the field of the reporting for them. So we connected them with UN Women representatives, with GRB experts, with organizations who monitor GRB implementation, with different interlocutors. And that was of great importance for them. And so their stories were really great. And regarding the format of the story, all of our journalists chose to write the story. And I think that it has something to do with their level of experience. I think that when the level of professionalism and experience in reporting of GRB topics grow, then they will be more keen to create more analytic formats, more complex formats, media formats, etc.
Thank you, Nelce. Selma, I would also like to hear you about this on the types of formats, types of approaches in dealing with these topics.
Of course, I would say same as Aurora. Each format and each style has its own purpose. So if we write about the abuse of the gender programs and about millions and millions, I don't know, euros, it will certainly not be enough for us to just to one news. So
we're losing you a bit, Selma.
Depends, but it's on the material.
Yes, I don't think
I'm
yes,
back.
We lost you, but I think you're back now. Okay, let's try.
Okay, but I don't know where
Okay.
where I
we lost you like
got just
okay, I don't think
when we on the material at our
yes, sorry, Selma, it's the connection isn't allowing us to hear a full sentence.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. If maybe you can use the chat or something to fulfill your answer. We also have a question from the audience, if I'm not wrong. We have a raised hand in the audience from our attendees. The raised hand is from Merciha Trinjakovic. So if we could get Merciha here as well to be able to ask her question, that would be good.
Hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wow, I heard so many stories today. I heard so many similar experiences from all around the region. And I think the most common things for us that we are dealing with one important topic, which is unfortunately not so visible in the media. A lot of you here and today mentioned that with all other more important issues that media all around the region are dealing with during week, during day, whatever your common tasks are. When we have the gender-based or the women empowering-based assignment story, it is always kind of, in the lower part of media, not on the headlines, not on the front lines. So it is frustrating to, here we have women. There are my colleague, Slađan Tomić from Sarajevo. We need more men to kind of, include in this dialogue to understand how important all this gender budgeting, of course, and thank you again. I have waited for so long to be heard, so I have so many things to say. The main line is to be more visible. I'm working in Magazine Grazia in Sarajevo, and for the cover of this issue, monthly issue of Magazine Grazia, we choose to put 7 politicians, all females, from different political background, and it was like mission impossible because although they are, most of them are on this frontline women empowering platform, it is hard when you put them in a situation to be next to each other, to not have some kind of disagreements, and because they are coming from different parts of Bosnia, because they are coming from different ideology or whatever. So it is hard, even in the media, when you have the pure idea of, girl power cover page. It is hard among women to find those who are willing to be part of that story. So there are a lot of gender-based issue that we need to address in a public space, but this is a good start, and I wanted to thank you all for all your experience. I have no questions. You were very clear. Hannah, you're great, and thank you again for allowing me to include myself and my point of view in this seminar.
Thank you very much, Mersiha, for the patience. We've heard you. I know you waited some time to be heard, but we've heard you. Thank you for the comments. And I think you also brought an important perspective into the whole story about how important it is to have men as well advocating for the, gender equality in general, but for this specific topic too. I would now like to thank our panelists for sharing their experience and their knowledge on the topic for the last a little bit less than an hour. I think it was very useful. It was good to have an overview of how different newsrooms, how different journalists work in different contexts. But I think there is a lot of similarity, as Mersiha said, when it comes to challenges and problems that you all are facing in trying to bring the topic of gender responsible budgeting closer to the institutions, to the public, and to the newsroom itself. Now, as we've started with the introduction by Ms. Ermira Lubani, we will also kind of wrap this up with some closing remarks from her. So we are looking forward to hear your perception of the discussion and any other comments you might have for the end.
Anna, thank you so much. In fact, I was like, merci, I couldn't stop myself thinking and raising hands. And I wanted to be part of after every panelist, I'm like, me, I have something else to say. But I can't say more like how happy I am with all this discussion. And UN Women, already, it's the UN agency which we are supporting gender responsive budgeting in more than 73 countries globally. And I have to say that our region is the first region globally which we are working with journalists, and we are looking at media and specifically to journalists as one of the actors which it was very clear from this panel can play a crucial role, not only on making gender responsive awareness raising of gender responsive budgeting to the public, but making government more accountable, more transparent, putting more, putting more pressure to the government about how the budget, how the funds, public funds are allocated and how they are spent. But not only that, how taxes are collected and how much, who pays taxes and who benefits from the taxes that the government is collecting. As UN Women, as UN Women and as a professional on gender responsive budgeting, usually we divide GRB in two big domains. In one domain, it's a lot of work done with line ministries, with Ministry of Finance, with municipalities, with city councillors, etc., etc. So it's the government side, the ones which they must do gender responsive budgeting, and are the one which they have to monitor how the steps towards gender equality is increasing or is decreasing. While on the other side, it's the area which I think much more work needs to be done. And the other side is the demand side. And in the demand side, we speak about supreme audit institutions, parliaments, women in community, media, civil society organizations. And this side, it's still like a lot of work. We are doing our best Ms. Sulce was saying about Albania making a lot of progress. In Albania, we are supporting citizens' budget with the view that journalists can get the information ready-made from the website. We are supporting a lot of participatory processes, and we are trying very hard to make the government to put the information online so journalists will get this information ready. We are working with Supreme Audit institutions and making them to write reports on gender equality and make these reports available. We are working with Institute of Statistics across the Western Balkans and make them to make possible to give, to make the gender sex segregated data available as per the sectors. But I have to say it's not an easy job. It's very difficult because budget, it's that big thing which nobody wants us to touch it. It's very much related to corruption, it's related to transparency, it's related to accountability. And in order for us to be able to tackle the budget, we need to understand the process, how the budget is being done. We need to understand where the money goes and what is the priority of the government. We need to understand as well, like what are the key social issues in the country and why gender inequality is widening. And then tackling them through the budget lenses is completely a different thing. We are missing the expertise globally as well. There are some globally excellent feminist economists, which they are trying doing articles in different media outlets, but it's, as you were saying, it's quite hard to find journalists which they can get access to data, they get the information and all of that. Like we are hearing all the discussions, and as I said at the beginning, I cannot say more how happy I am. We will try to at least include this information in our actual project and in the upcoming project as well. And we are looking forward to have media as one of our partners in order to make the puzzle of gender responsive budgeting fully filled. So thanks a lot for the discussion, and thank you for all questions and information and everything.
Thank you very much for these closing words, Ms. Albania. I think you did a great job in kind of leading us through all the important aspects of why the media perspective on gender responsive budgeting is important to achieving an overall improvement when it comes to gender equality at the end of the day. And by this, we end today's conference. I would like to thank you all for your presence, for your attention, and I hope that some of the people I see as attendees here have been motivated by what you heard here today to try and engage in this topic as a journalist yourself in the time ahead of us. We heard some very useful experiences on how to do it and what are the obstacles that can be expected, but we do have examples that it's possible. So when the Media Center does the research again in a couple of years, I hope we have a bigger number of articles and stories that deal with the topic of gender responsive budgeting. Thank you to all of our panelists, of course, and to all of our attendees. And yeah, have a successful and a beautiful rest of the day.
Thank you.